Welcome back to Fiction Flux. This is part 2 of our exciting series, What If Deku Became a Girl? If you haven't seen part 1 yet, make sure to check it out first for all the essential details. Now, let's dive back into this alternate universe and explore how our favorite hero navigates challenges and adventures in a whole new way. Let's get started. For the second time in so many days, Izuku found herself sitting nervously in a doctor's office. To her left was her mother, just as nervous, hands fidgeting much like her daughter. The doctor, Meitu Aoi, was an old classmate of her father's. They'd apparently kept touch over the years and was trustworthy enough to be brought in on this series of bizarre events. Her quirk, empathy, made her very high demand for therapy field, but her passion ultimately was medicine. Admittedly, it did help in situations like this. A single smile and slight pressure of her quirk removed a large weight of tension from the room. Now shall we begin? Yes, please go ahead, Inko said with a grateful smile. Well, let me say that whatever triggered this transformation did an impressive job, she began, sifting through several papers. Everything was changed down to the DNA with no makes of alteration. It all reads out as 100% natural. If I hadn't been informed of the situation, I would have assumed the before and after were files for a set of fraternal twins. There's no trace left, Izuku asked softly. Meitu cut the girl off before she could go any further. Now Izuku, don't misunderstand my meaning. She placed the papers down and locked her gaze with the young girl. You are still you, just the you'd have been if you were born female. She watched carefully until the girl gave a slight nod of understanding. Her mother took the girl's hand and gave it a squeeze. Now the change aside, you are remarkably healthy, no abnormalities or issues to be found. Even the minor health issues you had previously are simply gone. But I've been feeling really strange, Izuku spoke up to Inko's surprise. Izuku, you didn't mention feeling strange. Well, I didn't want to worry you. How so? What feels strange? I'm not sure how to explain it. I just feel off, physically. Izuku frowned. It's just weird. I thought it was because of the changes, but if everything checks out. What's wrong? She looked up to the doctor, hopeful for an answer. The doctor placed Izuku's files down and mulled over the possibilities. It's hard to say, there's no real precedent for this kind of transformation. Odd cases here and there, but nothing so complete as what you've experienced. My only guess would be that it's perception. Perception. Yes, physically everything changed over without a hitch, but your mind and memories were not altered. Perhaps you notice the differences more prominently because it's different than what you remember feeling, even the small natural things you normally don't notice standing out. That seems reasonable, Inko notes. So you think after Izuku has had more time to adjust, these feelings should diminish? Yes. Meitu frowned before adding, though I'm not sure how long that would take. It might be best to set up some sessions for Izuku to talk out her feelings and work through these changes. She turned her chair to pluck a planner off of the desk. Is it wise to involve anyone else? Inko asked with a worried frown. There's no need to worry, I was intending on seeing her myself. It's okay really, I didn't mean to make a big thing out of Izuku started, but the doctor merely looked at her to get her to trail away. This is for your own peace of mind, it's really no trouble at all. She dissolved the aura of authority with a jovial smile. Besides, I can have your father owe me a favor for once. The three shared a laugh, easing the tension of the room. Moving on from the raw physical reports, we have the quirk analysis results. This brought Izuku's full attention. According to your previous records, you were quirkless, correct? Why, yes. Well, this magic you obtain seems to originate from the same place as most emitter quirks do. It's not exactly the same, but it's within the range of natural variation. By all measures of modern medicine, your power appears to be a quirk. Izuku smiled brightly. It only grew as the doctor hung two X-rays side by side. Slight variance in male-female bone structure aside, there was one glaring difference. One had two pinky joints, the other only one. It really changed everything, Inko whispered, still trying to take it all in. Yes, this creature you stumbled upon may hold the key to an even greater understanding of what quirks are, Meitu said, holding back no illusions. And it's for that very reason we have to be so careful. If this information got into the wrong hands or became widespread, your guest could end up in a lot of trouble. You're not going to let anything bad happen to Aylward-sensei. Not if we can help it. Doctor. Meitu returned the X-rays to the file. Hasashi has been forming a small group to start working on this project from the inside. We won't approach the government until we have a firm understanding on what we are dealing with. Assuming Aylward-san was willing to assist us, we should be able to keep this under wraps. He is the agreeable sort, so I don't see why he wouldn't, Inko admitted with a small smile. But it does tie into what you want us to do with this. The doctor placed her hand on Izuku's file. Obviously we can't report what really happened. True, what did you have in mind? Well, we have two real options as I can see it. The first would to have you cut all ties, move to a new city, cover your tracks and start fresh. We could adjust Izuku's papers to fit her current gender. With all of Hayasashi's work overseas and you being a stay-at-home mother, we could keep this whole magic things out of sight. She shook her head. Obviously that is the most extreme option, but it does pose the least amount of questions. It does seem a bit excessive, despite what the elder Midoriya said. She had a thoughtful expression. The second would be a compromise, filing the transformation as an extreme side effect to a belated Quirk awakening. It's mostly the truth, but we'd have to be very careful to keep a consistent story for the inevitable barrage of questions. It would also likely cause some social strain for you all as the school and neighborhood would be adjust. The aftermaths could get quite messy. Oh my, it's not something you should rush into, give it some thought. Either way you decide to pursue this, know that you'll have my support. The doctor reached forward, placed her hand on top of Inko's and Izuku's. Meitu-san. Inko blinked away a few tears. Thank you, I'll discuss this with Hisashi when he gets home. So, when is he touching down? The day after next. It's a late flight, but we're planning on meeting him at the airport. Yeah, Izuku smiled brightly at the prospect of seeing her father again. Well, be sure to pass on a hello from me, though I'm sure I'll see him before too long once this project starts to progress. She smirked a little before picking up the file. So I'll let you two go. I'll be sure to call you later to set up a good schedule for my sessions with Izuku. We will be touching down in Tokyo in 15 minutes. Hisashi blinked back to reality, looking around as the other passengers started to gather their things. He'd been staring out the window, letting his mind wander. How much can change in 2 weeks? A hell of a lot apparently. The stability of one's job, the gender of your child, and your fundamental understand of magic and its place in the universe. Needless to say, it was a lot to take in. Despite all that, there was one clear route to take. He needed to go home and be there for his wife and son. Daughter, his mind corrected, triggering a sigh. Guilt and worry warred for the dominant position. There was no way he could have predicted what that statue could do, but he had essentially smuggled it out of the country without fully understanding it. How much had it changed him, or her? This is so damn confusing, he muttered, rubbing his temples. Was Izuku okay? Was she even still Izuku? That thought was quickly thrown aside. He couldn't even entertain that line of thinking. Izuku may have been born quirkless, but her drive to be a hero rarely wavered. If this change gave her that chance, then she was no doubt utilizing it to its fullest. The cabin rocked gently as the plane touched down on the runway. Hisashi broke himself from his thoughts and gathered up his carry-on. The passengers filed out to the airport proper. It didn't take long to spot his wife among the crowd. His heart swelled at seeing her for the first time in months. She offered him a soft smile that melted his heart as it had so many years ago. At her hip, Izuku stood waving with an excited smile. He crouched down and he watched his child come running, jumping into his arms. Lighter, his mind immediately pointed out, but he ignored it, basking in the exuberant affection. He stood and braced Izuku on one arm, pulling the hug back and looking his child in the face. The features were slight different, frame a bit slimmer perhaps, but those details didn't matter. Izuku was female, but she was still Izuku. He offered wide grin as he turned back to Inko. It's good to be home. Unable to really go into any details of magic cats and transformations, the taxi ride home was passed with more mundane pleasantries. Hisashi spoke of his travels through China, the sights he'd seen and what they had been studying. Izuku hung on every word, taking anything her father had to say with the utmost focus. Inko felt at ease in a way she hadn't in some time. The Midoriya family was all together once more. Everything would be better now. The sun had nearly set by the time they arrived back at the apartment building. Izuku practically dragging her father upstairs in her excitement. He allowed this with a wry smile, though internally he began to prepare himself. He was about to meet a being from another world. Inko had assured him the creature was of good intent, and he trusted his wife's intuition. Nonetheless, through some unknown means this being was able to awaken a quirk within his child. It defied all aspects they understood about how quirks worked and manifested. The future ramifications of all this were much more long-reaching. Aylward Sensei were home. Anxiety warred with excitement as the door unlocked and the family entered. The scent of stewed vegetables and spices wafted out from inside. In that case, have a seat, I'm nearly done. A young man's voice replied happily. Curious, Hisashi passed up the dinner table and headed to the kitchen. Sat atop the countertop was a black cat, its fur streaked with pink. On the stove in front of it was a large pot simmering away, a large wooden spoon stirring on its own. Aylward-san, you didn't need to do this. Inko chided with a small smile. It is a joyous occasion for you and your kin, is it not, Lady Midoriya? The young man's voice came from the cat's body, motioning his forepaw in a human-like shooing motion. Let me treat you, tonight. It turned its gaze to Hisashi and smiled good-naturedly. You must be Milady's husband. It seems I have you to thank for excavating me from where I've been buried. It was nothing, he managed to reply. You were quite the exquisite artifact. He noted lamely, still trying to rationalize everything he was seeing. You flatter me, he chuckled. We have much to discuss, but let it be over dinner. I'm still learning, but hopefully it will be to your tastes. With a small bow he went back to his stew, the spoon floating out from the pot so he could taste the broth. The elder Midoriya took the opportunity to excuse himself and head back to the dining room. His wife and child were already waiting, table already set for 4. He sat heavily in the chair next to his wife. Quote, There's a cat making us dinner. Yes, it does take some getting used to. Inko admitted. I'm starting to get that feeling. Hisashi noted, leaning back in his chair. So did you teach him that? Partly, Inko noted with a small smile. After reading all the encyclopedias he got curious about one of my cookbooks. He could follow the instruction precisely but took some time to understand how the stove worked. Namely, he wasn't very good at adjusting the recipes or understanding tastes, so I offered a few pointers. And I still may need some yet. The keeper's voice came from the hallway, the stew pot hovering into view as the cat trotted into the dining room. The pot landed on the table without a spill and the cat hopped up onto the table after it, sitting across from the rather puzzled man. It offered an oddly human smile and motioned a pot to the pot. Dinner is served. Inko took the opportunity to serve out the portions and all talk was put on hold as the family started to eat. Izuku thought it was a little peppery but still seemed to enjoy it. Inko pointed out the vegetables could have been cooked more thoroughly, while Hisashi stood to get some hot sauce to spice it up. Everyone's tastes were different after all. Aylward took the criticism easily, filing it all away for later use. Once everyone was mostly done, they spoke more freely about the whole situation. Izuku proudly showed off her quirk, using a pair of chopsticks. Reinforcing one and not the other and showing the difference. Aylward was quick to compliment the child's work ethic and how far she had come in this short time. Hisashi was clearly happy to hear the news, ruffing his daughter's hair, getting her to giggle happily as she basked in the praise. Under great reluctance, and only at her father's request, she donned the divine vestments. She didn't appreciate being called cute, even if both adults were in agreement of that fact. She quickly changed back and was, not pouting, for the remainder of the dinner. There were some important things to discuss before this night, but that could wait. They just enjoyed being family again. They all took to the living room, sitting together on the couch and watching television. Inko leaned onto her husband's shoulder, with his arm around her while Izuku nuzzled into his other side. They stayed that way long into the evening, until Izuku began to doze off on the couch. Hisashi carried her to her room and tucked her in as Inko watched from the door. Aylward wished the pair good night as they both headed to their own bedroom, spending a night together for the first time in nearly half a year. It was good to be home. With the pleasant night behind them, they sat down in the morning for a much more serious topic. The entire Midoriya family gathered in the living room to discuss the future of their family. Aylward gave the 3 their space, choosing to meditate off in the corner with only his word that he'd continue to support Izuku and the family in whatever path they choose to take. So, Hisashi begun. With Izuku's summer break ending at the end of August, we need to decide what we're going to do about all the changes. He stumbled a bit for lack of a better word. The Midoriya patriarch looked to his child, offering a small smile. So kiddo, you're the one who's most affected by all of this. What do you want to do? I know it's a lot, consider dear, Inko said softly. But we're both here to support you on whatever you want to do. I know, Izuku muttered, looking down to her lap. I've been thinking about it since Meitu-sensei mentioned it. I don't have a lot of friends, she admitted sadly. Her mother squeezed her shoulder while her father frowned slightly, but neither interrupted her. I have no particular attachment to the school or any teachers. Starting new, without anyone knowing, that was quirkless or she paused briefly before taking a deep breath and exhaling. Or that I was a boy. She whispered, voice shaky. It was the first time she had said such a thing out loud and meant it. Once school started, she wouldn't be able to ignore it anymore. Boys and girls had different school lives after all. It wasn't just having to wear a uniform. Physical education was separated, changing times, bathrooms. Trying to adjust to all of that alongside a school full of students who would know he had been a boy a few weeks ago. It was too much. I figured that would be the case. Hisashi started, but Izuku held up a hand. I'm not finished. Despite all of that, she looked up fully, a shaky determination in her eyes. I want Kachan to know. Izuku sweetie, Are you sure? Inko frowned, watching her daughter carefully as she gave a small nod. I know we're not close anymore, we haven't been for a while, she admitted sadly. He might not even notice or care if I moved away. She choked up a bit, but collected herself with a wavering breath. Even so, I have to let him know. I don't think it's a good idea, Hasashi said firmly. If we don't make a clean break it could lead to some obstacles later down the road. He watched Izuku tightly clenched her fists in her lap. He shared a concerned glance with his wife before he sighed. But if you're certain, I am, then we'll try to get that sorted out before the move. Thank you, she muttered, slowly relaxing as her mother hugged her close. Once she had calmed down she pulled back but kept a loose arm around her, letting her daughter lean against her. We're going to need to start looking into properties and see what is in our range. Inko began softly, passing a concerned glance over to her husband. With only 2 weeks I'm not sure we could get it all sorted, so little time. True, Hasashi muttered, leaning back in his chair. Maybe if we can explain things a bit to the school we could cover the curriculum here. He sat back up with a more thoughtful expression. Homeschooling, it's used a lot in America and Europe. But I thought the idea was not to let them know anything. Izuku chimed in worriedly. We wouldn't tell them everything. Just enough. I suppose that could work, but teaching him at home. Wouldn't we need to hire a tutor or? I believe I could help you with that much. Aylward spoke up, hopping up on the coffee table. Are you certain? Inko looked concerned. Teaching is my primary skill. Many guardian candidates come from out-of-the-way villages with no schools. As long as I have the coursework I'm sure Izuku would be able to keep pace. She is a wonderful student after all. Sensei, Izuku muttered, embarrassed at the praise. Okay then, just leave talking to the school to me, Hasashi said with a confident grin. And we'll take our time. Trying to find a good place for all of us. That seems like the best path for now. Inko agreed. Their future was still fairly up in the air, but at least they had some kind of plan now. Izuku didn't have any major problems with the plan as a whole, but if he wasn't going to be in school that meant she would need to talk with Bakugo before the end of vacation. As the adults and Keeper continued to hammer out the details she took a breath and forced a smile to her face. I'm gonna head to my room and check the hero news. Okay, she noted cheerfully, hopping off the couch. Okay honey, Inko replied, a bit puzzled at the sudden announcement. We're going out for lunch, so be sure to clean up before then. She called after her, but she had already turned the corner. Okay mom, she shouted back as she shut the door. With a conflicted heart she slowly walked over to her computer and booted it up. Her heart began to race as she opened up her instant messenger, left out a shaky sigh of relief on seeing he wasn't online. She typed and deleted several messages before finally just leaving a simple. Mighty Fan 1, hey. Mighty Fan 1, let me know when you're on. She stared at the messages, tempted to go back and delete them both, but held herself back. Seeing as she had the time she added. Mighty Fan 1, BRB. She stood from the computer and grabbed her bathroom supplies. She headed across the hall with a small amount of reluctance. She tossed her clothes in the dirty laundry and slowly turned to the mirror. She looked at her reflection with a determined grimace. She clenched her fists tightly and refused to turn away. This is me, she said softly, letting out a shaky breath but her gaze holding firm. I am Midoriya Izuku. She raised her hand and pointed to her reflection defiantly, her body being covered in green sparkles. I have a quirk and I will be a hero, she stated firmly, as if challenging her reflection to tell her otherwise. Hearing no argument, she shared a smile with her reflection, the green sparkles fading away. Pleased with herself, she turned away and set to taking a nice shower. With 2 towels, one around her torso and one around her hair, she slipped back into her room. Glancing at her computer monitor she froze. Mighty Fan 1, BRB. Tilda Explosion King is online. Tilda. Explosion King, you better get back soon, nerd. She rushed over to her computer despite her state of dress. Mighty Fan 1, I'm back, sorry. Explosion King, so what is it? That was the $1 million question, wasn't it? She looked at her keyboard, unsure how to reply. Hey, I got turned into a girl by a magic cat from another world and now I have a quirk. Crazy summer, right? She shook her head. There was no way he'd take anything of the sort seriously. Explosion King, out with it, Deku. Swallowing, she brought her shaky hands to keyboard. Mighty Fan 1, I have something I need to tell you, but it has to be in person. Mighty Fan 1, are you free anytime soon? Tilda Explosion King is typing. Izuku's hands hovered over the keyboard, waiting for a reply. Explosion King, I guess, my mom is dragging me somewhere stupid tomorrow, but I should be free Wednesday. Explosion King, you better not still be ing sick. Mighty Fan 1, no, I'm better. I'm like a whole new She immediately deleted what she was going to say and started over. Mighty Fan 1. I'm fine now. Mighty Fan 1. Meet me in the park, in the hidden area we used to go to pass the fallen log. Explosion King. Really? There. Explosion King. Fine, but this better be good Deku. Izuku stared at the keyboard for a moment before sighing and simply logging out. She leaned back in her chair looking up to the ceiling. Was this really a good idea? Probably not, but she had to. If she was really going to stop going to school and move away, his could be the last chance the two of them could see each other. Were they even friends anymore? It didn't matter, this was something she had to do. Come kiddo, get dressed, otherwise we're gonna leave you behind. Her father's voice carried all the way from the living room, muffled somewhat. Just a minute, she called back and set aside her towel to start getting dressed. The meetup with Bakugo hanging in the back of her mind, but she'd just have to tackle the meeting in a few days when Wednesday rolled around, for better or worse. It was early morning on Wednesday when Izuku got her things together, barely able to sleep the night before as she tried to work out the best way to explain things to Katsuki. In the end her only conclusion was just explain it all and see what happens. She debated putting on of her few feminine outfits to help her story but immediately shut it down, having barely been able to wear them in front of her mother much less outside. The mere thought of it left her cheeks crimson and headlight. After dressing in a regular t-shirt she quickly hopped onto her computer and typed up a quick message. Mighty Fan 1, heading out now, I'll be waiting. She debated writing more, or deleting it entirely but she left it be. Katsuki had always been an early riser so no doubt he'd see it before too long. Time would tell whether this was a good idea. After a moment to school her features she rushed out into the living room. With only word that she was heading out for a bit she continued on past to the door. Her mother only had the chance to offer a puzzled goodbye, Aylward watching with a curious expression. At the front of the apartment building she took a moment to settle her heart. Should she have told her parents what she was doing? Probably, but she was committed now. As ready as she could be she started off from her apartment toward the park. It was warm, but not overly so as the sun had yet to reach its apex. The foot traffic was light, even less so once she made it to the park proper. Ignoring the other morning joggers she turned off the main path to a forested area near the southern edge of the park. She paused at the worn-down metal fence marked with, "No trespassing," ducking through the hole and following along the path. 5 years, it had been nearly 5 years since she'd walked along this path. This used to be the place they would hang out nearly every day, playing hero and catching bugs. She paused at the log that crossed a small stream. She smiled slightly picturing the many times they'd passed by the spot. Kachan, she remembered the day he fell and she tried to help him out of the stream. How angry he'd gotten for some reason before he pushed her down into the water and stalked off with his friends. It was one of the last times she'd come here. She walked down to the stream and couched down touching the flowing water. It held a strong chill despite the summer days due to all the tree cover. Her reflection had changed over these few weeks. The more obvious differences were still hidden under her t-shirt and shorts. She could always see it, every time she looked. Hopefully drive. Meitu might be able to help with that. Her first session wouldn't be until the Sunday, the stress of the approaching school year now no longer an issue. She was able to look forward to dealing with these small issues instead. Hopefully I'll have something nice to say to Meitu-san about today, she mused as she turned her gaze up toward the trees above. Loud confident footsteps broke her from her musings. Anxiety grew despite her best efforts to push it down. The telltale creak of someone pushing open the tear in the fence gave her all she needed to know that he was actually here. She stood and brushed herself off more out of nerves than actually needing to. By the time she climbed back up to the walking path she saw him in his own t-shirt and shorts, hands in his pockets as he glared at her. Quote. Hey Kachan, this better be good Deku, he greeted, coarsely, and I thought you said you weren't fucking sick anymore. I'm not, I never was, she admitted softly, only getting a confused frown in response. What is that supposed to mean? It's a long story. Do you want to talk here, or go all the way up to the clearing? Here's fine, I don't have all day. He shot back irritably, guess he wasn't feeling the same nostalgia she was. That was fine. Okay, she took a shaky breath. I'm going to start, all I ask is that you don't interrupt until I'm done. She caught flicker of something in his eyes but the sour expression barely shifted. He scoffed and turned his head. Whatever, just talk. So she did, she explained the package from her father. Aylward's awakening and her first change. The original role of the Guardians and unlocking her quirk. She was impressed she got that far before he finally spoke up. That is the dumbest shit I've ever heard. It's a lot, yeah. She offered with a sigh, holding off on the rest of her story as he seemed already at his limit. You don't believe me, do you? She frowned as his eyes narrowed. Of course not, he growled crossly. I can't believe you dragged me all the way out here to feed me this bullshit. He turned to leave. So you got a quirk now, it sounds just as useless as what you would get. Nothing compared to mine. Really, was that all he got out of that? Disappointment warred with frustration as she clenched her fists tightly. I can transform, she said before she really noticed. She hadn't intended to show off the divine vestments. But his complete dismissal of everything, before she could even finish telling him what was actually happening, it cut deeply. Her statement seemed to give him pause and he glanced over his shoulder. You're really going in on this, aren't you? He muttered, clearly bored now. She didn't trust herself to say anything else, so she decided just to do it. Clutching her hand to her chest, she closed her eyes. Pretty guardian, transform. She erupted in green light as she called forth her divine vestments, feeling the familiar rush of power. She normally ignored the rush, more annoyed to change than anything, but right now she grasped onto that strength. Merging it with her own frustration to form a confidence she couldn't remember feeling in that past. When she opened her eyes again, she was focused, glaring at the boy who had once been her closet friend. He looked legitimately shocked as he looked back at her. Deku, you're wearing a fucking skirt. What are, you're really a girl, he trailed off. What the fuck, he whispered, trying to collect himself, a little red in the face. There was something satisfying in his puzzlement, but right now she had something else to prove. Hit me. What? I said hit me, she said firmly, caught up in this rush of emotions. You think my quirk is so useless? Her eyes narrowed. The challenge seemed to snap him out of his funk. A familiar scowl returned to his face, but instead of fear it invoked anticipation. You lost it, Deku. A small staccato of explosions flickered across his palm. You could barely take a hit before, and besides you're a girl now. He stumbled over the statement a bit as it was still such an unreal concept for the boy to consider. Izuku couldn't help a small smirk. Then prove it, Kachan. She covered her body in green sparkles, the guardian transformation reducing the usual drain of full body usage far more than it normally did. Unless you're afraid of being beaten by a girl. She teased lightly. She wasn't sure where all this attitude was coming from, but it felt amazing. Fine, if you want a beating. Katsuki growled, clenching his fist and marching forward. He wasn't using his quirk, not yet at least. Sometimes being underestimated was nice. She made no move to dodge or block as he swung in and struck her right in the face. Only reflexively closing her eyes before the hit. The sparkling girl was unmoved, the boy's fist stopping abruptly as if he'd punched a wall. What the, is that all, Kachan? She reached up and grabbed the boy's arm, pulling it slowly away from her face as he struggled to break her grip. For all her dislike of the Guardian uniform, it had some amazing properties. It was designed as armor for battling the dark forces, so its base level enchantment boosted her physical properties. The use of her reinforcement was wholly unnecessary, as the vestments would easily protect her from a punch from a normal 10-year-old, even one as athletic as Bakugo. Her strength as well was boosted, putting her for the first time in a position of strength against the boy. Concern and confusion spread across his face as he struggled to break her iron grip on his arm. Let go, damn it, he growled, opening his other hand and blasting her in the chest, his panic putting a bit more force into it than he likely would have normally when he was trying to be intimidating. She let go, though the force did knock her back a few steps. Aside from a small bit of heat, she was once again unscathed. With her reinforcement quirk layered over her vestments, it made a shield that even the explosion couldn't pierce. She couldn't help but laugh. She'd never felt this good, this in control when around Katsuki. What the hell are you? The blonde muttered, cautiously rubbing his sore wrist, edging slowly away from the magically enhanced girl. A hero, she said firmly, her eyes burning with conviction. She took a step toward him, despite being born quirkless. Being put down by you and the others. Every single day. She stalked closer as the boy began to back faster, his hands crackling with small explosions as he prepared to defend himself. I'm finally going to become a hero. She clenched her fists and ran right at him. For all the wonderful buffs, it did little to change the fact that Izuku had no actually fighting experience. Katsuki dodged her first two sloppy haymakers, though his counterpunch was shrugged off entirely. Even a couple of open-palmed explosions only pushed her back, delaying her sloppy onslaught. Alright, you asked for it, nerd. Having no other option, Bakugo gathered his hands together in front of him and let out a large explosion that pushed all the branches and bushes away with the force, singeing away all the grass beneath him. Fuck, he cursed softly, wincing at the recoil in his arms. His legs were shaky, having nearly buckled underneath him from the force of his own blast. Hope that wasn't too much, he frowned, trying to see past the smoke of his own explosion when Izuku came diving through it. She tackled him, pinning his arms to the ground with enough strength the boy couldn't lift them. Her face and torso were singed, Her sparkles gone, the blast had been strong enough to break through her defense but it had been blunted significantly. She loomed over him as he struggled, a manic smile on her lips. Get off me you crazy bitch. What the hell do you want? Admit it. She tightened her grip on the boy's arms. He hissed softly, arms still sore from pushing his quirk too far. Admit I'm not useless. She leaned in glaring at him eye to eye. Admit I can be a hero. That's enough. A male voice commanded. In sudden snap the divine vestments dissipated in a shower of sparkles. Izuku fell fully on top of Katsuki when hit with the wave of weakness. What? She shook her head trying clear the fog in her mind. Kei-chan. Why was she on top of him? When had they even fallen? The scale had shifted back and Katsuki easily pushed her aside scrambling away eyeing her wearily. She reached a hand up toward him. Wait, no, you stay the hell away from me. The blonde growled as he got up to his feet. Dragging me out in the woods to rub in this new power like you're better than me. He narrowed his eyes. You'll always be Deku, no matter what kind of cheat power you get. Got it, he growled before turning and stalking away. No, she called out weakly but he didn't even look back. Kachan. She grabbed her head in her hands. What had come over her? She had just wanted to tell him what was going on, why she wouldn't be going to school, that she was moving away. Why? Magic is powered by emotions. Sensei. Izuku looked to the keeper shakily. Aylward spoke calmly as he walked out from behind a bush, stopping next to the distraught girl. Part of a guardian's training is learning how to harness that emotion alongside their magic, he said softly in an understanding tone. You're an emotionally driven person Izuku. Mixed with your work ethic it's no surprise why magic has come so easily to you in our training but that can be a bane as well as a boon. Quote. You knew that would happen. I suspected it might, he admitted with a sad smile. Your aura was in such turmoil this morning I grew concerned. I see, she curled up against a tree, tucking her legs under her chin. The otherworldly cat trotted over and took a seat at her side. Part of my training will be helping you with controlling your emotions so you won't lose control in battle in the future. But it won't help take back what I did to Kachan. No it won't. Isn't there some kind of magic to make him forget? She asked hopefully as she hugged her legs tighter. Not in the kind of magic I am proficient with. Aylward replied with a sigh. His ears flickered toward her as he heard the girl sniffle softly. Leaning against her leg he closed his eyes. I'm sorry Izuku. The Keeper of Hope sat with his charges she softly cried, the summer breeze shifting the leaves above them. It was nearing noon when Izuku returned to her apartment. Aylward carried in her arms so she could hold him close. The cat-like being opened the door with a flick of telekinesis and she walked in without saying a word. Sensing the need for proper emotional support Aylward slipped out of the girl's arms and padded further into the apartment while the girl mechanically removed her shoes and walked to her room. Lady Midoriya, Hisashi looked up from a book, noting the serious look on the feline. She had to go out and run a few errands. I see, what's wrong? He closed his book and set it aside. Did something happen with Izuku? Indeed, he said with a sigh. I did what little I could but I believe she needs a parent right now. He made an uncomfortable expression. Inko was always much better at this kind of thing. But he couldn't sit back and do nothing. I'll see what I can do then. Thank you my lord, he said with a small bow. Hisashi stood and headed down the hallway. Izuku's door was closed, there was some muffled talking. Likely some kind of video or music. He knocked on the door and waited. There was no response. Hey kiddo, mind if I come in? He called out waiting for any kind of reply. The muffled talking stopped and after a long moment he finally heard a soft quote. Okay, it was something at least. He opened the door to see his daughter sitting on the edge of her bed, the room dark save the light of her computer monitor. Her eyes were red, she'd clearly been crying. On her computer was a paused video of All Might rescuing people from some calamity. It was probably that video, the one Inko had told him about. It was a video Izuku loved to watch, particularly after a rough day. He closed the door behind him and took a seat next to her. She offered nothing, it was going to be up to him to get to the bottom of things. So, do you want to tell me what happened? He saw his daughter flinch slightly but she continued to look down. After a long moment of silence she finally replied. Me and Kachan got into a fight, she admitted softly. Did you win? He joked good-naturedly only to see her cringe and look away, her little fists clenched tightly in her lap. Inko was so much better at this kind of thing, he prepared to start again when she spoke up, voice cracking a little. I used the divine vestments against him, she whispered shamefully. Hisashi wasn't 100% up on the details but from he understood hoes were designed for warfare against demons, understandably that could be dangerous to use against a kid. I see, he took a breath, and placed an arm around her shoulder, feeling her tense up. After a moment she relaxed and leaned against him. "Did you hurt him?" he asked calmly with no judgment. He felt her shake her head, but she didn't vocalize the response. "That a girl, I nearly did," she admitted softly. "I was stronger than him, he couldn't stop me." The words tumbled out of her mouth as she leaned closer, gripping his shirt. "It felt so good." Sensei said the transformation amplified my emotions. She fell silent for a moment, but Clear had more to say, so he waited patiently for her to find her words. "Does that mean I wanted to hurt him?" She sounded scared of this other side of her she wasn't fully aware of. "I know we're not really friends anymore, especially now." She trailed off, clearly pained by admitting the fact aloud. "Considering your relationship with that boy, there was likely some anger inside you. It's perfectly understandable, wanting to stand up to your bully when you find out you have the advantage." Hasashi brought his hand up and rested it on top of her head. "But ultimately you're one of the good ones, Izuku. You're always thinking about others and wanting to help." She could feel her tense up, wanting to dispute him, but he ruffled her hair softly. "That being said, you are still young, you are going to make mistakes. It's the only way you can learn how to get better," he said with a smile as she seemed to relax again. "You really think so?" "I know so," he replied with a chuckle. "You're a smart kid, you keep training with Al and I'm sure he'll help you control those feelings," he assured her before hugging her close. "And you'll have your mom and I here to support you all that way. Promise?" she asked in a tiny voice as she hugged him tightly. "Promise, Dad." "Yeah, kiddo, quote. "Thanks, no problem," he said easily, glad she seemed to have calmed down finally. Despite that, he could feel her fidget a bit in his arms. Was there more? Dad, see, could you?" She trailed off into an embarrassed mumble he couldn't decipher. "What was that? Could you pat my head again?" She spoke quickly, burying her face further into his side. Hasashi blinked for a moment, for he chuckled softly and moved his hand to softly ruffle the girl's head once more. She seemed to relax, the tension in her shoulders easing up. He kept still and allowed her to continue to lean against him, her vice-like grip loosening as the stress melted away. Quote. "I missed you, Dad," she whispered, snuggling closer. "I know, kiddo," he replied with a small, sad smile as he continued to run his hands through her hair. "I missed you too." Her breathing slowed until she finally passed out. He brushed away the hair from her face and watched her sleep, no longer afraid or full of doubt. She'd been through so much in such a short time, it was only going to get harder from here. He carefully shifted the girl until she was laying on the bed properly and tucked her in, leaving a light kiss on her forehead. "Good night, Izuku." He shut off her computer and left the room, carefully closing the door behind him. Giving the door one last glance, he headed back to the living room. He was here this time, no hurried calls during a break in work. No long-distance care packages. It was going to be different now. He was going to make sure of it, and that would start with a phone call. It was late in the evening when Izuku woke up in her bed, physically exhausted and stomach growling. Fuzzy memories of the forest confrontation sat at the edge of her mind. For a moment she wondered it had all been some horrible dream. But as the fog cleared, so did her perspective. It had happened. The realization made her want to curl into her blankets and try to go back to sleep. Her stomach refused to be ignored, growling loudly, making it impossible to relax. With a sigh she slipped out from the covers and to her feet. She glanced at her desktop but decided just to head out, the smell of a home-cooked dinner overpowering her depressed funk. Her mother was making katsudon, her favorite. Dinner was a cozy affair. Her mother fussing over her even more than usual, having heard the details from Aylward and her father. Like both of them, she was fully supportive of her despite the mistakes she'd made and was equally confident she'd be able to overcome them. Despite her initial mindset, by the end of it all she was able to smile again, if only a small one. Having her parents and sensei all lifting her up, she was truly blessed. She returned to her room in higher spirits, still tired from the roller coaster of emotion and magical drain. She looked to her desktop again, but this time walked over and turned it on once more. Taking a deep breath, she opened her messenger. There had been no new messages since her one left this morning. With great reluctance she began typing. "Mighty Fan 1. Kachan, are you on?" She waited. Minutes dragged on with no reply. He normally was on this time of night, even though the program said he was offline. That meant he could just be on invisible, or he'd blocked her. Despite that, she continued to type. "Mighty Fan 1. I'm sorry about what I did in the forest. I completely lost control of myself. I still have a long way to go in my training. Mighty Fan 1. But that's beside the point. Mighty Fan 1. I had wanted to tell you that I won't be returning to school." She paused briefly, already knowing what she was going to type but not looking forward to doing so. "Mighty Fan 1. because of all the changes I can't just go to school like nothing's changed. I'm a girl now and well that's going to weird everyone out. It weirds me out too sometimes. She had started to ramble on about the strangeness but deleted back down. That wasn't important to what she was trying to say right now, and more than likely he probably didn't care. If he was going to read this at all. Briefly clenching her fists and relaxed again and went back to delivering her message. Mighty Fan 1. So we're going to be moving away and starting over. I don't know where yet but I'll let you know as soon as I do. Mighty Fan 1. Even though you probably don't want to see me again. She nearly deleted that line but couldn't bring herself to do so. Mighty Fan 1. I know we haven't been close for a long time, but I just wanted to say. I've always admired you, despite everything you've said to me. Mighty Fan 1. I just wanted you to know that. Mighty Fan 1. Goodnight Kakon. She leaned back and looked at everything she wrote before slowly logging back off and going back to bed. Emotions swirling in her chest, wondering if this was what it was like to lose a friend. As promised, her father had somehow managed to talk the school into agreeing to her homeschooling for the second semester. Apparently he got Drive, Maydu to assist in a convincing enough half-truth that they acquiesced to the arrangement. The last week of vacation magic lessons were put on hold as Aylward hunkered down with all the study materials, spending all day and night to memorize all the relevant material, absorbing and processing it all, before putting together a full curriculum. The family spent this time going out and having a last bit of fun, before putting the troubles of summer behind them. Once the school year started, it took a couple of weeks or so for the routine to set in. After sharing breakfast as a family they would split up. Aylward would take Izuku aside and begin his lessons. Izuku would shift into the divine vestments and remain as such for the rest of the lessons. This had been Inko's idea. Getting her daughter more used to the kind of uniform she'd likely have to wear once she re-entered school. It also did an excellent job of forcing her to confront the emotional amplifying it could cause and work to control it. Izuku was less than thrilled but complied. The first lesson was magic quirk training. It was easily the subject that had her most engaged, so starting the day got her motivated. From there it moved on to math, Japanese, and English. Math was an essential part of many magical disciplines, so the lessons were unorthodox compared to the ones she had been used to, but still helped her learn what she needed. The otherworldly cat, being naturally gifted in language, pushed Izuku to learn much more than her previous teachers had ever bothered to. Admittedly, in the past she had only made any effort to learn due to All Might's own connection with America. She learned to dread this part of the day, but despite it all she did learn. After that was lunch and a short break. She was allowed to dismiss the vestments and eat in peace. Her mother would often use this time to check on her well-being. They returned to lessons with physical education. It began with extensive stretches. Aylward put particular notice on Izuku's flexibility, as due to the nature of reinforcement it would limit the user's agility when used on oneself. Once the girl was sufficiently limbered up they would go out for a jog. The neighbors had given some odd looks the first few times, but before long they grew used to seeing the young girl jogging alongside her odd-looking cat. The jog usually ended in the secluded grove of the park where she'd met with Katsuki. Aylward always had some manner of game, more in line with guardian training rather the general phys ed. She would need to enhance herself with reinforcement to dodge, block or navigate her sensei's challenge for the day. If she failed to do so it would repeat the next day until she surpassed it. Energy burnt out they would return home and relax with more traditional lessons and the return of the divine vestments. Social studies and science were just as she remembered them from her normal schooling, though having the teacher's undivided attention allowed her to get any extra answers or insights she'd normally be confused by. The afternoon would end with meditation, refocusing her magic and focusing on self-control exercises. After that she was free to spend her time as she liked. Lacking any other social life, it was usual spent catching back up with the various heroic happenings of the day. Noting new heroes' debuts and analyzing their quirks. Hisashi came back in the evening, spending the time before dinner to discuss things with Aylward, slowly documenting the world the keeper originally came from. It was one of several projects her father was working on after the initial presentation he and his team made in regards to the outsider. Dinner was a shared experience, one for the four of them to unwind and enjoy a meal together. They separated once more, Inko and Hisashi spending the evening together while Aylward went back to whatever his latest book was and Izuku back to her room. Only to come back around the next day all over again. The only different day was Sundays. Aylward would leave in the morning alongside Hisashi for further study on the scientific end of things. Studying magic and the power within of the hope of Devaria. Izuku would spend these off days with his mother, going out and doing various things around town. In the afternoon they would head downtown and Izuku would have her weekly session with Dr. Maytu. She would speak candidly with the empath about her feelings and her past. leaving every session with a lighter heart and clearer picture of herself. It continued along into fall, lessons adjusting over time. The general education continued as prepared, progressing steadily. Her quirk grew as she worked, making up for the years of powerlessness with a drive that only continued to impress the keeper. The physical training began to evolve from games to proper strength and flexibility training Aylward had picked up from studying a book on the training regimes of gymnasts. Regarding their overall fitness and flexibility is ideal for Izuku's further growth as a user of reinforcement. Lacking most of the proper equipment, he used magic to make temporary constructs when a suitable improvisation couldn't be found. Inko also started getting more involved in the day-to-day. After going through her own spiritual journey, she found her magic source and began to work alongside her daughter in the daily lessons. She didn't have the full access to her power due to her age and lack of connection to the hope, but it had improved her simple telekinesis quirk into being a bit more versatile in her daily life. No longer simply pulling small objects toward her to direct them as well. It was early November when things changed. They'd found a house, a proper house, in the Nabu ward of Yokohama, a oceanside property a few hours north. It was a bit of a fixer-upper, but as ever Hasashi seemed to know the right people to help fix it up enough to make it through the winter months. It was still a short train ride away from Musudafu, so Izuku could still have her weekly sessions with Dr. Meidou, and Hasashi could meet up with his collaborators to continue their research and study. Once the renovations were done, it was just the packing and they could be fully moved in before Christmas. Izuku hadn't spoken with Bakugo since that day back at the end of summer. Despite that, she still sent the boy a message with the news. She was disappointed but not surprised when she received no reply yet again. As moving day approached, lessons were shortened so the family could begin packing and finalizing all the changed paperwork that would be needed to reintroduce her into society. Those final papers coming with even further changes. Changes that would make a true step forward toward a new future and a fresh start. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Meet you in next part.